Concluding implications for institutions. Finally, do religious institutions mirror these stages of faith in their growth and development? The best research suggests so. Religious institutions reflect the spiritual stage that is the common denominator of the total membership. Since the vast majority of adherents to any religion would be in the earlier stages of faith, most religious institutions would be in stages 1, 2, or 3. The interesting question is whether any religious institution has ever moved beyond stage 3 into the higher, more mature stages of faith. Or do religious institutions inevitably get stuck in one of the earlier stages? But first, what is a religion, or a religious institution? Well, religious institutions are a human response to the perception of God's work in the world. The institution is created out of that awareness, stage 1, and is intended to promote the work of God on earth and help people learn and grow in their knowledge and experience of God, stage 2. New religions are God-focused and God-honoring. But over time they become more and more occupied with self-preservation. The natural selfishness of individuals has its counterpart in corporate selfishness. That is, institutions become less and less about God and more about preserving the existence of the institution. This is rarely by anyone's intention. It seems to be a natural process that happens over time. And although religious leaders can be perverse, it usually seems to happen in spite of the best intentions on the part of leaders. In a real sense, the question is whether any religious institution is capable of growing past stage 3, the success stage. In the success stage, the institution grows in numbers and financially. It expands its operations and becomes an empire. The bigger the institution becomes, the more it can do for God, so growing and preserving the institution becomes increasingly the focus. But in order to move beyond this corporate focus, a religion would have to go through a dark night of the soul, which would likely result in the destruction of the institution, at least in the form that people have grown accustomed to. So has any religious institution ever found life by dying? Has any religious institution ever taken up the cross and the full implications of that term, Mark 8 verses 34 to 38? I'm not sure any matured religious institution has ever done that, though the early church of the New Testament made great strides in the bloom of the initial romance with Jesus, but in the 2nd century that quickly faded. So as a rule, religious institutions inevitably get stuck in stages 2 or 3. That means that people who experience the dark night of the soul and enter stage 4 and beyond inevitably feel more and more out of sync with the religion they are part of. If you have experienced this, you are not abnormal. This is probably as natural as breathing. People in stages 5 and 6 have no real home on this earth. Their home is in heaven. They are often a source of perplexity and even amusement among those in the throes of spiritual success. How much more do they perplex those who have become stuck at stage 2 or 3? These are enamored of their success and their theological correctness and cannot understand the shifting winds of the Spirit who creates unique, unpredictable spiritual partners of God. So what is a person in stages 4 to 6 to do about this? If a religion has truly abandoned God in some perverse way, then they should leave it. But that doesn't mean that they will feel more at home somewhere else. God-following institutions are still subject to the law of the common denominator. So higher stage followers of God are not likely to find a religious institution that fully affirms their walk with God. Fortunately, their spiritual nourishment is no longer dependent on the institution, for it comes from those rare upper-level mentors and God Himself. So, how does one survive the sense of dislocation that is so common among stage 4 to 6 followers of God? The key lies in the mission principle of meeting people where they are. It is the mentoring principle. People are attracted to those who are one stage ahead of them. The high-level mentor can place himself or herself in the place where the individual or audience needing to be mentored needs them to be. Approach a stage 2 context from stage 3. Approach a stage 3 context from stage 4. That is easy for the higher stage person to do since they have been through all the stages. Furthermore, such contextual maneuvering is not hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is going back to an earlier stage for selfish reasons or to avoid losing control. Hypocrisy is about getting stuck in an earlier stage because the challenge of moving on is too threatening somehow. But true mentoring is about going back for the sake of others, not for our own sake. We can be comfortable in our spiritual skin, at home with God in stages 4, 5, or 6. But we go back for the sake of mission, for the sake of others. This is the way people at the upper stages can remain useful and engaged with the institutions God has allowed and encouraged to be put into place. Religious institutions are not bad things, and of themselves. They started out with the purpose of honoring God and pointing people to His mighty activity in their midst. Institutions provide a great deal of organization and efficiency in the service of that mission. Even when they get stuck, God can still use them to reach individuals with a message that might not otherwise have come to them. But religious institutions are not an end in themselves. They are useful only to the degree that they point outside of themselves to the great work of God on the earth. Such institutions need higher-level companions of God to keep them on track. They need the prophetic challenge to die to self and point all things toward God. Don't abandon your community because you no longer seem to fit, though there is a time and place for such abandonment, Revelation 18 verse 4. But up until such a departure point, this sense of dislocation is likely God's call to a sacrificial ministry outside of your comfort zone and the upper levels of your spiritual relationship with God, where you can be true to yourself and still serve an institution that is imperfect. One final point. My spiritual life has been nurtured in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. That tradition was grounded in end-time reflection. Part of that end-time thinking is the concept of a time of trouble. Some prefer the term tribulation, through which God's faithful people must pass in order to attain their spiritual destiny, Revelation 7 verse 14. Some have called this view final generation perfection, with this view being inspired in part by the statement of a beloved mentor, 1 Ellen G. White, with the statement reading as follows: "When the character of Christ is perfectly reproduced in His people, then He will come to claim them as His own in the second coming." Ellen G. White, Christ's Object Lessons, 69. Note that White did not say in His individuals as if this perfection was a personal thing. She says in His people, which sounds like a corporate thing, a community experience. So while the Adventist view of end-time perfection has failed to attain its goal at the individual level, the very concept of end-time perfection seems to sabotage individual progress toward that goal. Perhaps there is a corporate dimension to this expectation. Is it possible that God will so arrange events that His faithful people from every nation, language, and religion will find each other in a glorious end-time remnant, Revelation 12 verse 17? That this remnant will collectively pass through a dark night of the soul and be taken to another level? That this level will demonstrate to the universe that sinful, selfish humans in community can connect with God at the most intimate level in spite of the obstacles to such on this earth? That God will be uniquely glorified in His end-time people, 1 Thessalonians 2 verses 19 to 20? Well, only time will tell. My dream is to see something never before seen in the spiritual history of this earth. A worldwide community of faith that has collectively passed through the dark night of the soul, the biblical concept of end-time tribulation, and has moved collectively into a sold-out, intimate faithfulness to God's purpose and God's mission. May I live to see Him come in the fullest sense of that term.